Episode 149, Gaining a Better Understanding of OCD with Jill Freestone.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
At some point in your life, you have probably joked about your own tendencies or someone else's as being OCD. But OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, is a real condition that those who struggle with are not laughing about. Jill Freestone is on the podcast today talking about what OCD really is, the myths surrounding it, the warning signs, and the effective treatment. Jill covers a lot of ground in this podcast and during her interview shows slides. If you would like to see those slides, please click on the link in the show notes that will take you to our YouTube channel. This is an information-packed episode, and Jill brings both her personal and professional experience to this topic. If you have questions and want to learn more, please reach out to Jill and set up a time to chat with her. She will be on the podcast again next week as well, answering more questions about scrupulosity, a form of OCD that comes from religion, so be sure to tune in then. Please enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the podcast today, everybody. Today's podcast is actually going to be a little bit different. We're actually doing this in two parts. So Coach Jill Freestone is here with me, and she will be here for this episode and the one following. Our topic that we're discussing today felt like one that we needed more time to be able to cover those things. So I am going to introduce Jill. Hey, Jill, how are you?
I'm great. It's so fun to be here with you.
It's fun to be here. I said I'm going to introduce you, but actually you're going to introduce yourself.
I was just ready to listen. Great. So my coaching business is on big emotions. Anxiety and anger are the big ones, and how those affect relationships, like with yourself or with family. And so I do some family coaching or parent and teen or just individuals. And I love it. I've been doing that topic for 5 years, and I personally have experienced anxiety, OCD, depression, and I have 3 adult daughters, and husband is my best friend, been married for 26 years this week. So
congratulations.
Yeah, we love the outdoors and we love music. So 2 of our favorite things.
Love it. Well, thank you. Thanks for introducing yourself, and thank you for sharing us a few of the things that you struggle with. I think it's really good for people to hear that, to hear people say that that's something they struggle with. And then obviously the things that we're going to talk about today, it is helpful as we talk through those things for people to know that you've actually experienced this and are giving us some firsthand experience and awareness for themselves as they are looking and trying to see where they might fit into this whole picture. So today, Jill and I are talking about OCD. And I think that's a phrase that people can laugh at because it's been one of those things, I don't know, that we kind of use it flippantly sometimes, or we used to use it more flippantly and probably not in the right way, but there's so much education that we can have around it. And so that is what we are hoping to do today, is to educate you and maybe give you some tools and things to work through that in your life or the lives of people that you love if you're experiencing that. So Jill, anything that you would have to add to that before we get moving on this topic?
No, well said. I think it's important to learn about it so that we don't use it flippantly or incorrectly.
Yeah. All right. So for those of you who are listening to this, I want you to know we are going to be showing this also on you can see the visuals, the slide presentation that Jill has on our YouTube channel. So right now, Jill is sharing something. If you're listening, it's fine. You don't need to be able to view it because we'll be talking through the whole thing. But if you're like me, the visual is kind of always helpful. So we'll link to that in the show notes if you want to be able to see that. So Jill, take it away. Myths of OCD. Let's hear about it.
So the myth of OCD is that the main one is that it's a preference for organization or detail, and that you want it to be that way. That's usually a personality trait or a choice, a preference. And with OCD, it's an irresistible urge. So it's a feeling, you're really feeling driven to do time-consuming or even sometimes torturous acts that you'd rather not do, or a belief that these rituals are necessary to prevent some negative consequence or to escape anxiety. So it's not fun or enjoyable, usually, most often. And it's just like people who enjoy symmetry might say, oh, I'm so OCD, I have to organize this, or my house is so clean, or my kitchen's so organized. Usually that's not OCD. Usually, and which is weird, most people who have OCD have like messy places. And so try not to believe that, or that it's only about hand washing or symmetry. There's so many subtypes of OCD. So that one, and then the other, along with these myths, I can stop sharing there, is that it takes people an average of 10 years to get the right help. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's an average. And it's because many therapists are not trained in OCD very well. It's a newly, we've known about OCD forever, but to actually have the right understanding of it and the right treatment is fairly new. And a lot of therapists don't know much about any of the subtypes. Like most therapists that I've been talking to, just, people I meet, don't really understand scrupulosity at all, or haven't heard of it even. So how could they help me effectively?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just hear.
Well, hold on. Can I stop you right there? Like, people who are listening probably don't know a lot of people might not know what scrupulosity is. Oh. So when you say subtypes, just just explain that really quick so that they have some reference here.
Yeah. So scrupulosity is a version of OCD that has to do with morality or ethics or religion. And some other ones like contamination, like hand washing is one. And like violent thoughts or violent acts or perfectionism or sexual orientation or identity, like what your identity is, things related to death or existential philosophical things. Like I'm just reading this slide, we can show. Maybe I'll show that slide now and then we won't need to show it later.
Okay, I hope I'm not throwing you off. I just feel like that gives them a good reference.
The emotional contamination, like personality traits, or that things just have to be just right, or body dysmorphic disorder. Then there's also the themes of like hair picking or skin picking. And those are treated with a slightly different treatment than the ERP, which will come into that. It's COMB, comb method. So those are things that are good to know as well. But yeah.
Okay, so interesting. I actually was talking with somebody just the other day and said the word scrupulosity, and they're like, oh my gosh, I never knew what that was. I was sitting in a church meeting 2 days ago and somebody said that word and I had to Google it to see what it was. And anyway, so that's why I wanted you to explain it a little bit, because I know that there's people that don't know.
Yeah, it's important to understand. So there's a lot of inaccurate information online, and of course, all kinds of inaccurate stuff on social media. And that's why it's important to get a specialist, which we'll talk about later, how to find that and make sure it's not just any therapist. So people think they can just go to a therapist and get diagnosed. Mm-hmm. But 15 years ago, I went to a therapist and was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. But anxiety can be a symptom of OCD.
Okay.
It's on top. But if you treat anxiety, it depends if it's coming from OCD, how you should treat it.
Okay.
And so some of my anxieties were reducing and doing well because of that treatment, but the ones that were coming from OCD were getting worse. So we didn't have the correct diagnosis or the correct tools. So while we're talking about this, another reason I wasn't diagnosed is because I knew about scrupulosity 15 years ago. I was wondering if one of my children had it. I was Googling and researching, which I do compulsively. I thought I just had scrupulous tendencies. Which a lot of us have scrupulous tendencies. We do, but there's certain ways that we can find out if it's actually OCD or if it's just, you're in your personality or something. So that's something we have to really look at. But also, if you kind of resonate with anything that we're talking about, then it's smart to just go to a specialist and get evaluated, because the things that you're doing may be making it worse without you realizing it, and you're going to have so much relief.
I'm sure felt like a weight had been lifted when you finally found the proper help for you.
Right. And I was also so good and at what I was doing, like self-coaching, for example, like I was
Yes.
so good at it, but I was doing it way more than was necessary.
Yeah.
And some people do believe that OCD is a spectrum, but those with true OCD can't ever turn it off. That's hard to define because for me, the OCD only shows up in certain areas. So I feel like it turns off in those areas, but it's never off in those categories.
Hmm.
So that's also interesting. So many people have things we're obsessed about and we fixate on them and we're bothered if it's just not right, but we don't necessarily feel that compulsion that we have to fix it. Like we could walk away from it and choose to come back later. So if there's an element of choice, then it's probably not OCD.
I think that's a really good distinction because I have often said, like, oh, I probably have OCD or whatever about, because I like things to be organized and tidy. And so I'm always like organizing things, but it's not, that's good for me to hear that distinction. It doesn't feel like something that I have to do. It feels like something that's more fun for me to do. And I think you
Yeah.
described that in the beginning.
Yeah. And also you could try not doing it and see what your body feels. How much anxiety is there if you don't do it?
Mm-hmm.
And and sometimes for me, there's a few of the things that I do that are actually enjoyable, which kind of crosses over that definition.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is you can take some space and not feel like it's forcing you by a compulsive act to do it, but that you give yourself time and space and choose when and how often.
Okay.
And that's how you get some distance in that. The other thing is intrusive, disturbing thoughts. Like many people have intrusive thoughts, and especially people with anxiety. And you might even have a certain ritual you do to cope with it. But if it's only occasional, then it's not OCD. But it's tricky because if you're really high functioning like me, because someone who has done so much therapy, self-coaching, education, you can be so high functioning, but still be struggling in some areas
Mm-hmm.
that are unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yeah, you are a very self-aware person. I guess that's how I would describe it. And I would imagine that for somebody who is very self-aware, who is really good at managing their brain, it would be really hard to really get a diagnosis there because you can
Yeah.
keep it at bay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you totally hide it and cover it and you do well. Yeah. But the funny thing is too with me of this need to know for sure and need to completely heal or which a lot of coaches and therapists get into, that actually helped me to get diagnosed, but it also showed like, oh, this is OCD instead of just letting it go. But I think people who like self-help can get into that fall into that too. And that could also
Yeah.
be a trauma response of just never feeling good enough that they're searching for that, which for me, that wasn't the searching. We all have our different traumas, but it was wanting to heal every single thing and wanting to make sure that it was all understood.
So before I ask you my other question, I just want to make sure that there any other myths that you wanted to address as we talked about it. And I guess, and we've probably bled over into my next question, like how do you define OCD?
Yeah, let's define it. That's probably the best thing to do. So defining OCD, I'm going to share my screen for this one. The three things that need to be there are obsessions, which is usually an intrusive thought, or it could be something that you hear or see, and then a compulsion to neutralize or lessen the anxiety you feel when that thought or thing happens.
Okay.
And the extent that you're doing those compulsions, how much it starts to interfere with your life or how high the anxiety is.
Okay. Can you give us an example, like something that would can maybe combine those characteristics?
Yeah. So, well, the hand washing one is pretty easy for people to understand. So, if you feel like you've touched somebody or something and your hands aren't clean and you're going to get sick, then you start to worry over and over again. Oh no. And so the compulsion is the need to make sure they're clean. And that's the certainty because OCD is always searching for certainty. And
that would be the neutralizing behavior because they feel like if they wash their hands, they would get rid of that
the germ.
fear that they had or whatever was causing the feeling.
Yeah. If you can wash your hands good enough, then you would feel for sure, okay, they're clean. I can be sure that I'm not going to get sick. So then you go and do it. But then because you've taken that action, the OCD, then it goes through that loop that you want to make sure again and again and again. And you would think that you would wash your hands and it would just be done. And that's part of the nature of OCD, is that it's never done. It never believes that it's surely for sure.
Okay.
That's another hallmark of that. And so that need to be certain, and just OCD always often grabs onto things that you really care about too. And so it can trick you there, because you're like, no, I really care about this. I want to make sure. I think it's important to have cleanliness. And it's just, I mean, it's COVID, like we should all care. And so then it can trick your brain. Same with me with religion or moral things, like, no, this is ethically important. Just me worried about some stupid thing.
So just in my own brain, so that I can understand this better, we know, and you had said that, like, it's a feeling that you want to get rid of, or did I misunderstand that? Like, are they really trying to get rid of that? Like, they have fear over the germs on their hands, and so that fear they want to get rid of. So they think if they wash their hands, that fear will go away because the germs are gone. So is it the fear they want to get rid of, or is it the actual germs, or is it a combination of both?
Oh, I'd say both for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Not to be nitpicky, but I think this goes even to like.
So the thing is with OCD, it is so tricky. Like, it is a really tricky thing that even the trained therapists on it say that it just jumps all over the place. Like, as soon as you start to nail it down, it will start to focus on something else. So if you nail down that it's the germs, then it'll start focusing on the actual hand washing. And so a lot of the effort is just to ask yourself in that moment is, what's the function of my behavior? Why am I doing this? And then being able to do the actions, which we'll talk about later.
Okay. So does somebody who have the compulsive thinking, if their brain will compulsively like focus on something, if they were able to clear that up in their mind and not focus about that, do they jump? Will that compulsion then jump to something else to just compulsively think about? Or does that one thing ever get cleared up?
That's what I was going to say. The effort to try to clear up the brain is something that you wouldn't want to do with OCD.
Okay.
Because that's like logically trying to think through something and trying to think a different thought or not think a thought. And that actually increases it.
Okay.
And so that's a great question. And so then what you would do is, the more that you just notice that thought is coming up, and then give yourself space and say, oh, whatever, there's the anxious thought. Maybe my hands are clean, maybe they're not. Then what happens is the thought starts showing up less often.
Okay.
Or it shows up and it doesn't give as much power. You're not giving as much power to it. It's not pulling you as strongly. You're like, oh yeah, that used to make me feel that way. Ooh, today it's really strong, but I'm still not going to act on it. So you become more in charge of it, but it's not that you're working to clean your brain out. That would be the opposite.
Well, and I guess I was actually also like, if it was a particular circumstance that was causing you to have those compulsions, and that circumstance was taken from your life, so it was no longer that circumstance, will your brain then move to something else to have that compulsive thinking about, if that one particular thing is left? Do you know what am I clearing that up?
I don't know that there's a substantial answer to that, but I would guess it, because it's not like you're cured of OCD, like, part of the way your brain works. And so most likely it will jump around.
Okay. I guess that was my question, is like, is the compulsive thinking just always going to be there regardless of what it is?
Yeah, that's for most of the research that I've done, is that it is just the way the brain works. And so learning how to respond differently to it is the answer.
Okay.
So understanding this, let's see if there's anything we haven't covered. Oh, another one, like, so say you're driving and you run over this bump, and then you might have this weird thought of, I've run over someone, like I've killed someone. And so that thought is just illogical and intrusive, and you don't want to have it. But other people might have that thought and they'll just like, oh, that was a wacky thought. And then you move on. But with OCD, that thought will continue to stay stuck on a loop until you need to like go and check.
Gotcha.
But if you go and check, then it'll still keep looping. Anyway, just like, it's more than a simple thought. It's usually about weird things. With perfectionism, this is a tricky one, because people are like, oh, I'm just a perfectionist, but it can overplay, and that can be a sub-theme of OCD. So for example, the person would say, oh, I'm not perfect, because they're still trying to become. So it's more about the fear of what would happen if you weren't perfect, or you didn't do something perfectly, than kind of like the organizing. Like, someone who has this perfectly organized house may or may not have OCD, but we have to look at the fear, like I talked about earlier.
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
I'll show this false alarm loop that might help.
Okay.
So there are not many places online that the therapists recommend, but Nathan Peterson is one. And this is his drawing of this OCD cycle. So the trigger that we've been talking about, this intrusive thought, a memory, an urge, an impulse, an image, an idea, or even just a feeling, a sensation might happen, to attach some meaning to it, that it is a threat, but it's just a perceived threat in your brain. And then you start to feel anxiety or distress. And then that leads to wanting to remove that anxiety. So this urge is really strong. It's really strong. And that leads you to want to do something about it. It could be avoiding, reassurance seeking, physical compulsions, mental rituals, or praying. But the problem is all of this, the actions that you might take, keep you in this loop. You're trying to find certainty somehow. And so then you get temporary relief, and that relief confirms, oh, yes, it was a threat. And so every time that that trigger comes up, I must go through this whole cycle again.
Okay.
Because that's so dangerous. And it did feel better when I did this.
Yeah. I look at that diagram, and if you're not watching and if you're just listening, it's just like it's a circle, a cycle picture, and it makes me feel trapped when I look at it. Like anyway, so I can imagine like being in that cycle would be very uncomfortable.
And the hard thing too is that most don't even realize they're doing it. Like say hand washing, may have washed their hands 10 or 20 times and they may not know it. They're just doing that because it's required. Like, oh yeah, I have to wash my hands 10 times every time I wash my hands. Or they're totally aware and they're hating it. They might be crying because their hands are bleeding and rubbing, but they have no option to not do it.
Okay.
Some of the different compulsions, mentally reviewing or repeating or redoing something. It could be as simple as like having to move your arm in a different way because it just doesn't feel right. Like as your arm in a certain way. Or reviewing things, repeating the way you move, talk, saying it again a different way, seeking reassurance. This is a really big one. One I didn't know I was doing either. And so once my husband was taught by the therapist to be on the lookout for that, then he would say, oh, could this be OCD? Are you seeking reassurance on this? And then we'd pause for a minute, like, oh, because I really wanted it. I knew it was important. And I'm like, just say it. He said, I'm sorry. I know this is frustrating, but I'm not going to answer here. We're going to go.
So when you're saying seeking for assurance, give us like an example of what that might have been.
Like, well, this is a really horrible thing. This is unethical. And don't you believe in me? And don't you believe it too? And isn't it wrong? And so then I would want him to reassure me that, yeah, this is horrible. And he thinks so too. And I'm not crazy. And
like he's in agreement with you. And
it's me that it's okay that I feel this and that I'm not crazy and that I'm right. And so it's a little bit of validation and it's a little bit of reassurance.
Okay.
And not just agreeing, but it's like reassuring that what I'm, that I'm not crazy, that this is true. And this is really a big deal. And so then he'd say, well, maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. We don't know for sure. Like maybe there's another way to look at this. Maybe there's other people involved. And I'd be just like, like, no, there's one way. So mentally checking, like you're going through this checklist of different things or evaluating, reviewing things. You could physically go like around your house, checking different things. You might have a routine before you can get into bed or before you can get into the car, or mentally going through rationalizations. So again, some of this can look like self-coaching. Researching, talked about avoidance of things, confessing. So this is linked to scrupulosity. I don't do this type, but over and over, like praying hundreds of times a day, seeking forgiveness, or talking to a bishop over and over again about the same topic, washing and cleaning things, putting things in order, trying to get things just right. And then let's see, remember the purpose is to make the thoughts and the anxiety go away, to achieve certainty, to try to know that you haven't like caused something bad or that you've done your moral duty. You're trying to fix or undo the intrusive thought. So if you rethink it through, you might be able to undo it, or to prove in some way that your thoughts aren't intended, like you're not bad because you have this horrible thought, to like restore your moral or spiritual standing, like the sense of rightness is okay. But again, when you're trying to make something just right, it doesn't work because it reinforces the power of the obsession or the fear when we go ahead and make it just right. So the rituals that they might be doing to counteract that might maybe turning lights off and on, or checking the locks, organizing or lining things up, or touching items in a certain way or in a certain order, completing a certain routine we talked about, eating food in a certain way, even the simple avoiding cracks on the sidewalk. Like people used to joke about that all the time. So just experiment with it.
Yeah.
What's the function of why you're doing that? Checking on loved ones, making sure the water isn't running, the food is all still fresh, the pets have their food and water, checking the
And
information is correct
so many of those things seem
too.
like noble and purposeful and necessary and good, right?
Yes.
Until,
Uh-huh.
until it's not, until it's like destructive to you.
Yeah. With the seeking reassurance, you might also be asking for compliments or like confirming that something is safe. Like, are you sure that this is locked, and are you sure that we're all safe here? Or that someone is nice and smart and kind? Or are you sure I did the right thing? Like when I did this, did I do this conversation the right way? Can you reassure me that it's all okay? And then that's when my husband would have to say, like, I don't know, we really can't tell.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
he's been trained to not give that. And that's a subtle thing with parents and children too, that the parent has to be trained with that. And then, like we talked with coaching, that's something you have to be really aware of. If any of your clients have OCD, even if it's on different topics, just like, wait, why are you asking me this? Are you searching for certainty? And if they have OCD, you don't want to answer that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It really can be subtle because they're like, oh no, I just need to know because, and it sounds like morally fine.
Yeah. And so like we for sure have coaches listening, but we probably have a lot of parents and people who have loved ones listening as well. And so being informed and knowing if your loved one if you might suspect that they're struggling with OCD, like this is helpful for you because we probably are asking questions at times that are not helpful in a situation. Just like you had said, like we can self-coach or we can try to self-coach, or like a coach might notice that somebody's trying to do something. And if we're not careful, it can be harmful rather than helpful. And I think the same does go for any of us. So I would.
Important. There are a few red flags you can watch for to help you identify OCD. What language might they use? So again, if this is your spouse, yourself, your child, if you're a coach, your client, they might be saying things like, am I good enough? Some version of that. Did I do enough? Like with church or spiritual related things. Excessive religious concern or shame or anxiety would be with scrupulosity. Extra thinking about it or concern, or like intense emotions around moral issues, wanting to know if something is right or correct, or concerned that something must be, but what about this? But what about this? And like they keep saying, or I keep thinking about this. I keep thinking about this. I'm trying to figure this out. And again, some of these are healthy behaviors, but you want to notice for the frequency and why they're doing it. Again, if we don't know, it's the function. What is the function of why they're asking this? What's the reason? How is this going to be useful to them? I keep feeling bad about, or this doesn't feel right. This just isn't right. Or I need to know for sure. Can you help me with that? I need to know for sure. So then this next slide is just another longer list of some things to watch for. So for example, one client that I had came for anxiety, and she kept spending so much of the questions that she was asking me and talking about how often she's thinking about these things, trying to figure it out, trying to understand, like, is there thinking that there's a right way to do something, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy this properly, and then worrying about that. There's a lot of thinking about thoughts before, during, and after an event. Again, this can kind of correlate to what some of us are taught, to be aware of your thoughts and constantly choose, better thoughts. So just look at that. This constant seeking for approval or reassurance can be an indicator. So they might be seeking reassurance during the anxiety, and then they might feel better temporarily, but it comes back and they continue to ask for it in the same thing. Any kind of seeking for certainty, seeking to know for sure about something, and plus anxiety. So bringing up the same thing over and over again. Like if it's a client, they might want to be coached on this same topic, or if it's a child, teen or spouse, just this same topic, they won't let it go. Sometimes there might be really unusual topics or just like one topic that they tend to have anxiety over, but not in other areas. If it's anxiety, if they understand like the model and they're trying to coach themselves and they're using that model just excessively, trying to get the right model or the right thought or the right result, like they have an inability to use a new thought and for it to stick, or they might be good at this and they temporarily feel better, but then they're using it again and again and again, like continuing to have to work on that same thing. There's a lot of heavy guilt or shame on one topic, like say if it's pornography and it's really intense and heavier than usual, or excessive amounts of repenting or seeking for forgiveness. Like with the porn, it could be any other topic. There's maybe a lot of rituals, avoidances or compulsions, difficulty making decisions, really perfectionistic or rigid about maybe schoolwork or after school activities, or they could be really slow or late to doing things because they're busy doing compulsions, or there's a heavy need to be in control. Some of the outward signs might also just be looking distracted because they're busy in their head.
Yeah. And I would say then probably the first step, well, obviously to get a diagnosis, and we'll talk about that in the next episode, like where to go to get a diagnosis. So you will know if you or somebody you love are struggling with that, but also what are some effective treatments at this, once you kind of can realize that. And we'll talk about that. And then in our next episode, we will talk about, getting diagnosed. I think we'll talk a little bit more about scrupulosity too in the next episode as well. But for now, as we're winding this one up, what are the effects of treatment for somebody? Can they feel like there is hope for them, right? If they can get some treatment, what are some of those effects that they can expect to experience?
Well, like for me, there was this feeling of being like you get your agency back or your ability to choose and to be in control instead of the OCD being in control. And also, like if your compulsions are mostly in your head, which for me, most of that was, which is why it's hidden, because nobody knows how busy my brain is.
Right.
And so it's hard to observe that. And also the things that I was doing looked very healthy. Like I was helping people, I was taking dinners, I was making long phone calls and supporting people, I'm researching, I'm taking classes, like that all looks healthy. It's not like somebody's hands that are bleeding from being overwashed.
Right.
So the effect is that I had like a huge space in my brain, like available to just rest.
Probably for the first time in forever.
Because if you've been doing this your whole life, you have no idea that there's difference.
Yeah.
And then when you start to feel those things again, you identify it really quickly. Oh, that's this. It feels this way. Or maybe it's catching up and you have a partner or a parent or someone who can be like, hey, that looks like, could this be that you're searching for certainty in this? And then, yeah, okay, I know what to do.
Mm-hmm. So helpful to have the words to be able to say, oh, this looks like this. Just being able to identify it brings so much control and maybe a little bit of clarity or understanding in a situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted people to hear and understand that there are positive effects from getting treatment, because sometimes it seems too hard to take that step to get help. It just seems overwhelming, I think, to just where do I even start? So I think it's important for people to recognize there is value in getting help. There's value in getting diagnosed. There's value in just seeking that, because so much can change when we are able to identify and move forward that direction.
I agree. I just wanted to bring up the screen that shows some of the helpful resources. So there's links on here for the websites and the two people on YouTube and Instagram that I think are great therapists that are highly trained in OCD.
Okay, so we're going to wind up this episode so that people don't feel like they have so much to internalize in one little setting. But before we go, Jill, I would like you to share with people where they can find more of you, and then we will have you back again next week to to tell, well, we're just recording straight after this, to be honest, everybody, but you will be able to catch Jill's next episode next week and hear a little bit more from her. But before we go, Jill, where can people find you?
Yeah, my website is easy. Just my name, jillfreestone.com. And I'm on Instagram at Jill Freestone Coaching. So those are the two main places to find me. I have done a lot of podcast guest appearances. Those are on my website.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We hope this has given you some education and maybe even brought up some questions for you. So if you have questions, reach out, and I'm sure that, you can email us, you can leave comments on the review section, like leave a comment in the review section of the podcast, and we can also answer some questions there. But thank you, Jill. And we will see you guys again next week with more information on OCD. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.